to you as well. Sorry, I'm watching. I'm waiting for my dogs to erupt. Those are all the signals are there. We're pet friendly chapter, so if they want to follow, feel free to put them on screen. That thing is dark. I have 2 cats, so they might be scratching as well.
Welcome everyone to the Westborough Tri-Board Budget Summit meeting. Today is Thursday, September 23rd, 2021. This is Kristen Vincent. I am chair of the Westborough School Committee, and I am tri-chairing this Westborough Budget Summit meeting with Mike Beretti, chair of the Advisory Finance Committee, and Alan Edinburgh, chair of the Select Board. This tri-board budget summit meeting is called to order. Please stand if you are able for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This meeting is being conducted in a hybrid format, so pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, this meeting will be conducted in person and via remote means in accordance with applicable law. This means that members of the public body, as well as members of the public, may access this meeting in person or via virtual means. In-person attendance will be here in the Great Hall at the Forbes Building at 45 West Main Street, and it is possible that any or all members of the public body may attend remotely, with in-person attendance consisting of members of the public. When required by law or allowed by the chairs, persons wishing to provide public comment or otherwise participate in the meeting may do so in person attendance or by accessing the meeting remotely. Additionally, the meeting will be broadcast live in real time on Westborough TV on Verizon Channel 28 and Charter 192 and Westborough TV on YouTube. I'd like to notify everyone in the room with us tonight that this meeting is being recorded by Westborough TV, and thank you to Westborough TV for covering this broadcast tonight. Anyone attending this meeting in person tonight is welcome to wear a mask, and unvaccinated individuals are strongly encouraged and advised to wear masks. I'll just quickly review the agenda for our meeting. We'll quickly go over some goals and objectives in the format of the meeting, and then we will have an update of FY22 estimates, and we'll have a debt presentation, and then presentations of the preliminary FY 2023 budget pressures and priorities, and then we'll move into our FY 23 budget format and process. We'll hear a little bit about the American Rescue Plan proposals, and then we will finish with a library project update. So the goal of this, you can see there's a goal up here on the slide to bring together the Select Board, Advisory Finance Committee, School Committee, and department heads to understand FY 2023 budget priorities before the budget process begins. And so the ultimate goal of this is to have a smooth and effective budget planning process. Our objectives tonight are to launch the FY 23 budget planning process, create a common understanding of our current fiscal positions of the town, identify and understand the budgetary pressures and priorities. And the format of this meeting will be a series of presentations with time for question and answer from each of the boards. But we want to make sure that it is clear that not all questions may be answered during this meeting. This is a great time to brainstorm questions, but the questions can be noted but not necessarily answered tonight. But the questions will help us move our process forward. And just as a reminder, some of us need to be sharing microphones, so just make sure when it's your turn to speak that you use a microphone to do so. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to our town manager, Christy Williams.
Thank you. I was working on this presentation at home last night, and my 12-year-old asked me what I was doing and saw how many slides I had, and she said, oh, I would zone out. So I'm really hoping that I can keep it interesting. I'm going to start by talking about the closeout of 2021. 2021 was closed out on June 30th of 2021, and so this is just a comparison of 2021 over 2020. As you can see, we ended the year with a higher, during the year we had a higher free cash balance at $13.1 million. Our operating budget increase was 2.65% over FY20, and our average single-family tax bill increased 2.33%, so that's $10,300. When you look here, this is a free cash comparison of our fiscal year ending 6/30/2020, and so this is a comparison of Westborough to our data dashboard communities, so we're that green line at the 3.16 million. And then this slide shows our comparison of the average single-family tax bill, so we're that green line again in the middle. And then this shows our comparison to our communities with our excess levy capacity. So this is similar to the slides we've seen before, and it grew to 12.2 million. So those are all the slides. That's the sort of summary closeout of fiscal 21. You can see that we've obviously ended the fiscal year in a strong financial position. Given all the work that we all did on our fiscal 21 budget, I think we should be really proud of where we ended up. And so if there's any questions about any of this, I can take them now.
Borrow these funds. At that time, we will most likely borrow a substantial portion of the remaining Fails project, along with perhaps the Hastings HVAC project, because one would assume that the sprinklers will be all set and they will move on to that HVAC project. Also, the North Street Cemetery will probably need some money as well. And we always work with the departments to make sure that we only borrow what they absolutely need, because we don't want to over borrow for a project. So I know there's a lot of numbers up there, so, but I would like to take a few minutes to talk about our long-term debt. So this slide only shows out to fiscal year 26, but the actual debt schedule goes out to fiscal 39. Can you imagine how many numbers would be out there then? So you can see where about halfway down the page it says annual costs in fiscal 22 of $3.8 million. So that's our total costs for long-term debt, and this is only general fund debt. And then underneath there, I show the cost of pay downs or short-term debt. Our comprehensive fiscal management policies call for a debt ratio of a 7% or below, and you can see that percent debt versus general fund of 5.2, 5.4. So we are considerably less than that 7% figure. The permanent debt is reduced by approximately $1 million over those 5 years, because we have what's called a declining debt strategy. And the delta between those, if you remember back to the debt strategy, is what we will be using towards the debt strategy. So just to recap, we currently have long-term debt that extends to 2039, and those schedules continue to decline. And again, you might have noticed back on 2024, you see that 2.9 million on that very top line goes to 17,000 in 25. So that is when the Mill Pond and high school projects are paid off. But we also, that $2.5 million for MSBA payments, obviously if we're not paying the debt, the MSBA isn't going to pay us. So we lose that. So it is a drop of about $500,000, but it's not a drop as significant as that looks on that particular multi-purpose line. So again, we're taking advantage of short-term rates and paying down as much as possible, remembering that after 3 years of a short-term borrow, we have to start making pay downs. We can only short-term borrow for 10 years. So eventually we're going to have to permanently borrow. And obviously we do work closely with our financial advisors to make these decisions. Just want to talk a little bit about the Capital Improvement Fund. Many of you may remember that this fund was set up via special legislation to capture the tax revenue for the over 55 community located on the former Westborough State Hospital property. This fund also spurred what is commonly known as the debt strategy. And it may feel like it happened a really long time ago, but I promise you it wasn't that long ago that we started talking about all this. So unfortunately the project is moving along strong, but it was impacted by the COVID-19, and the construction industry worldwide obviously was affected, and therefore the project is somewhat behind initial projections. We are still working the debt strategy, but as we have said, at some point we will have to permanently borrow some of the approved projects. And that's my slides, but lastly, I would just like to make an editorial note that none of those figures on there included any projects that have not been borrowed, not been authorized. So if you're thinking of a project and it hasn't gone to town meeting, it was not in those numbers. I just want to make sure everyone understands that.
Thank you very much. Any questions from members of the select board? Okay.
AFC?
School committee?
So we have several budget pressures and priorities, and I think this will probably generate some more questions. The first sort of subcategory that we want to talk about is capital projects in the capital plan. As I'm sure you're all aware, the capital requests are due to Kim Foster, our assistant town manager, in the month of September. So we're just sort of pulling those together. So this presentation is not about what capital projects you're going to see upcoming, but really more about our process. So as most of you are aware, we've done a lot of work on our capital plan. We're really trying to create a comprehensive document that's really going to show the town's capital needs, not just for 5 years and not just sort of the smaller cost projects, but really going out 20 to 25 years. And so last year we took a step towards that goal and updated our capital planning policy. We also updated our capital planning documents. So Kim Foster spent a lot of time putting that together, and that's an example of one of the project sheets that you'll see that's filled out by our departments and then that is reviewed by the Capital Expenditure Planning Committee and ultimately is part of the capital planning document that's in the budget document. So the biggest change last year, in addition to just the policy, was that the level of projects that were included in the capital plan. Typically, the capital plan was viewed as sort of $1 million that was allocated by the Capital Expenditure Planning Committee. Last year, we asked for all of the capital needs, and so all of those were reviewed by the Capital Expenditure Planning Committee and were put forward on the town meeting warrant by them. This new format includes, as I said, this new detail sheet. Our FY22 capital requests totaled $2.86 million, and the 5-year plan total capital request was $40.3 million, and that's inclusive of the $24 million library project that you'll hear about later today. We also expect that many of our cost estimates, especially related to construction, are going to be higher, just based on what we all know is happening in that industry right now. And so as we look towards the FY23 capital plan, we'll have to update estimates, as we always do, but expecting those to be higher this time. And this year, we expect to move closer to our goal, so we're going to incorporate that long-range capital outlook. So this will be the first year for that. The department heads have all received a long-range planning sheet that's going to look less detailed than the sheet that was just up in front of you, but really something to highlight things that departments have identified as a capital need going forward. Anything over $500,000 at this point is what we've asked them to give back to us. So the name of the project, a narrative about it, how it might relate to the master plan, the climate action plan, strategic plan, and then also what the estimated cost is at this point, which, as you all know, will change as we get closer. And that's a lookout 20 years beyond the 5-year capital plan. And really the purpose of that is to put into one document all of our capital needs and to be able to, as a finance team, really strategize when it's appropriate for those projects to be put before town meeting, when we feel like it's responsible to incur that debt. So, we're excited to continue to move forward in that direction, and I think Amber's going to come and talk to you now about the school's capital.
Good to see all of you. So
For the purposes of tonight, we're really trying to get kind of the large priority items that need to be foreshadowed so that we're getting a bigger picture as we head into the more granular budgeting. So one of the priorities that we're calling out, and there will be others as Christy and I progress through the presentation, we thought it made the most sense to you that as we proceed through capital and then through salaries and through other types of budget impacts, we'll trade back and forth so you can stay on topic. So sticking to the topics of...
So each of those boxes has below it a little, spreadsheet looking thing. And so each of these boxes have their own spreadsheets, and there's lots and lots of projects associated with each of these categories. They all have different funding sources, but at the end of the day, it's all things that we've identified that need to be done to maintain the infrastructure we have in our town. So this is a summary of the numbers that are reflected in those little spreadsheets that were shown on the previous slide. So we're looking 5 years out, kind of going down the left-hand side of the chart, binned generally by funding source, so water enterprise, sewer enterprise, Chapter 90, which is our state apportionment for maintaining our roads. So that's not necessarily a bill that the town is paying, but it's important to recognize that we only spend that, I say only, but any road maintenance we do, resurfacing of roads and repair of sidewalks or replacement of sidewalks is funded by that $795,000. And so if there's anything else we want to do, and we certainly know there's more to do if we want to, it would come from the town in some form or fashion. And then the last box reflects what would probably come out of our general fund or free cash is stormwater, and then our fleet and our buildings. So listed across the top, you can see the fiscal years 23 to 27, and then those dollar figures associated with what we projected as requirements for each of those years, the next 5 years. And I think I know you're looking at a lot of numbers tonight, but you can see that some of those numbers are rather large. I'm not suggesting tonight that, for the water in FY23, we're going to come to the town with an $11 million request. However, we know that there's $11.7 million worth of work that should be done. And so what needs to happen, and certainly it's our responsibility to provide this analysis, is to recommend how we're going to move forward with, facilitating what we know needs to get done. And so not for tonight to figure all that out, but for tonight to make everybody aware that there are some hefty infrastructure costs on the horizon, and this is a 5-year projection, and it doesn't stop at 27. It continues almost indefinitely since everything has a life cycle. So the two takeaways I think on this slide are, first, nothing on this slide reflects new growth. So anything that we talk about that's new, so more sidewalks or any other thing that we have identified potentially through the master plan or other venues, that's not reflected here. This is all stuff we have right now that we have to maintain. The second takeaway, I think, is ultimately we're going to be making decisions based on risk. And the risk is, if we don't do it, what happens? And so we have a choice to be proactive in some cases and address issues before they become real problems, or we could make a decision to say that, it's okay to wait and we'll just react. We know that we'd all prefer, at least I think we'd all prefer to be proactive, but that's certainly not always the case or always possible. But the point is that there's some numbers we're showing here. These numbers are I think, relatively accurate. Certainly the future years are estimates, but I think they're pretty close. And if anything, they're low. So we've got numbers to work with to help inform decisions that we have to make coming down the road. So that's what I wanted to share with you tonight, and take any questions.
Any questions from the select board? Ian.
Hey, Chris, just real quick, I mean, I know it's numerous projects, but the difference with the fiscal year 23 in water, and I guess even 25, anything that's really big in there that we should be aware of, or is it an accumulation of a lot of smaller things?
So water specifically in FY23, I think many are aware of a PFAS issue that, or not issue, but a concern that we had earlier this year with our water. Our water is safe, just so everybody knows, but we did identify some things that probably need to be addressed at some point. So 80% of that cost is associated with correcting that. So there are a few, in some of these numbers, there are some kind of one-time big chunks that need to be addressed, and that's an example of one for FY23.
Thank you.
Anything else from the select board? Okay, thank you.
AFC, Hank?
Yeah, Chris, the water and sewer numbers are large enough that they imply that we're going to see water and sewer rates go up substantially. Have you done the analysis that says that that's probably going to happen, and is that part of what we're looking at? Because again, water and sewer gets liquidated through ratepayers, not through the taxpayer.
Yeah, so I guess I'll give two comments to that. One is we've done some preliminary analysis. More needs to be done. I think it's fair to say that if we were to pursue exactly these numbers and ratepayers were going to pay it all, meaning we didn't have any opportunity for grants or anything else, then yes, rates would go up. But there's still more work to be done to help define how we best tackle some of these problems. The second point is that although they're binned on this slide by enterprise, it doesn't, from a cost efficiency and just a practical disruption to the town, in many cases, it would be recommended that we do water and road or water and stormwater at the same time. So it's probably not advisable to say, oh, we can just spend water money. It's not, town tax money, because that's not really, that may not be the case. I mean, it could be that we need to do a water project and we're going to fix the road at the same time, and there's other things, that wouldn't be funded through the water enterprise. So I think that's, that's all stuff we would recommend, and that'd be all part of the discussion, but I guess it's just important not to look at it very stovepiped.
Chris, as I recall, last year or the year before, there was a discussion about water usage measuring. There were some issues with meters in the commercial side of things. Has that been resolved, or is it on its way to resolution? And is that a big impact on the numbers we're looking at?
So it has not been resolved. It's gonna be a multi-year process to resolve that. So back to the question from earlier, we talked about 23. So in FY25, you can see that $7 million figure there. So that is a projection, and that one is it's just a projection based on what we can guess would be a cost to basically redo our metering system, and that would be a significant step in addressing the issue you raised. But it's a multi-year effort. There's lots of different factors, and we haven't addressed it. We've only begun to address it, I guess is the point. And so there's more costs to be paid. Ideally, we would see some of that revenue recaptured as we capture the water that's being used and not lost, but that's not something we could give any numbers to right now.
Thank you. Any other AFC questions? Thanks, Chris.
Any questions from the school committee?
Maya? So in one of three major areas that we wanted to emphasize, first being the capital, which we just covered, now we move to contract agreements. For the Westborough Public Schools, the Unit A contract, the largest majority portion of our contracts for faculty and staff, is under Unit A. We are in year 2 of that contract, and it is the most expensive portion of the 3-year contract. So this year, budgetarily, it will be the largest impact to our final presentation. At the close of the last day of school, the design of that second-year contract increase is that there's a 0.5 COLA put on the last day of salary at the end of school, and then there's a 3.5 increase on the total. So overall, a 4, and that will be the largest kind of impacting factor of our budgeting. That's for current staff we have. That doesn't look at any increases in staffing, but just anticipate that number. For those of you, again, who have participated in this conversation over time, Westborough Public Schools have worked very hard. The school committee has done an incredibly good job to provide conservative, well-framed contracts for multiple years for our faculty. And over the 6 years that they had a no COLA built into the contract design, that's 6 years where that contract table didn't grow. And so competitively, as we look at Hopkinton, Shrewsbury, Southborough, Northborough, districts around us competing for faculty, they had moved substantially in front of Westborough salaries. In order to remain competitive and to keep our staff and to be able to hire new teaching staff, which is continually becoming harder and harder to do in the field, we need to have an advantageous contract. So in this last round of settlement, the teachers received a solid contract that helped us take a first step forwards towards making our salary closer competitively to those right next door to us. So I think everyone's been really articulate. I know we brought it to AFC. They've been articulate about accepting that they recognize that to be an important part of what our budgeting will be. So I'm calling that out. The second is that the transportation contract is what I was like digging for over there, moves into year 2. The actual rollover of that contract itself isn't particularly larger in year 2, but we will look at potential route. The impact will be potential route increases if we have to add a bus. So we've seen some increases in ridership with students returning, where we've had to add a bus to 2 runs for the high school in this current year. We'll have to see if that remains, part of what's projected into budgeting for next year. And I think everyone's been reading around the industry pressures and unanticipated costs of transportation. Not quite sure how those will level out for us in terms of cost estimates, but I know that I'll be arguing to carry more available in the transportation line item until we see that stabilize. Currently, right now, we're struggling with getting buses to transport our students to activities and to athletics and after school and late buses, and part of what are just running a high-level school system that's very active for our students. That means we need to scramble to go to outdoor vendors to try to get other buses and other contracts. Those come at premium. But in the early days of school here, we've seen a shortage of buses for all of those after-school events. So you're either canceling, you're canceling games, canceling outings, or scrambling to add a contracted bus service. So while those don't come at the same impact increase as you see in the contracts for salaries, it's one I want to note to you that would have impact. I'd open up to any questions.
Select Board?
AFC?
School committee listens to me talk about it all the time.
Familiar.
Moving on to staff and staffing implementation on the town side. We have 5 union contracts that are going to expire on June 30th, 2022. We've We've reached out to all of the unions to initiate negotiations. We started with some of them. We have 6 units, so only our firefighter contract is settled at this point because they're off cycle. Going back to the strategic plan, as we talk about additional staffing implementation, one of the top priorities of the 2018 strategic plan was to evaluate and implement recommendations in the public safety needs assessment studies and examine the potential for a satellite public safety facility. So in this slide, the select board's recently heard from Chief Laurie and Deputy Chief Minardi about the police department staffing implementation. You all heard about this. We had a study done in 2018. We came to you with an implementation plan. You can see that in the left-hand column. Because of COVID, you can see in FY21, we added 1 additional police officer instead of the 3 that we had planned to add. In fiscal 22, and the upcoming October town meeting warrant is 1 lieutenant position. That will be before the voters in October. And then there's an ARPA proposal for 3 additional police officers, which would get them back to where they were, had intended to be. However, the proposal would be to incrementally increase the budget and incrementally reduce the ARPA funding, and that's why you're seeing no additional officers in 23 and 24. Obviously, if ARPA funding is not awarded for this purpose, then the police department is going to need to come to you in fiscal 23 budget with a request for additional officers. Also understanding that the MRI study that was done called for 15 additional officers by FY24. As you see, neither one of these plans meet that goal of 15 additional officers in FY24, and so the chief and the deputy will continue to monitor the department's needs as we move forward. The fire department also had a staffing study done, and so this was one of the reasons that Chief Purcell applied for and was awarded the SAFER grant, which brought on 8 additional firefighters in November of 2018. As you can see, that was also an incremental increase to the budget and incremental reduction of the grant. That's how the grant is set up. And so fiscal 23 will be the first year where the full cost of those 8 additional firefighters will be within the budget. The biggest sort of hit to the budget was really this fiscal year in FY22, so we talked a lot about that when we presented that budget. Additional strategic plan priority was evaluate the town-wide municipal staffing for non-public safety. So as most of you know, we did a staffing study that was completed last spring, and that recommended additional positions. It recommended opportunities for efficiency and lots of changes within our organization. And so we've started to implement that. In FY21, we added the community development director position, where we elevated the building commissioner to that position. We also added a human resources coordinator position on the town side. And so in fiscal 23 and part of fiscal 22, you'll see the additional positions of grants administrative / chief procurement officer. That position is underway. We've actually hired someone who has not started yet. Very excited to bring her on to help us with management of contracts and procurement. That person's salary will be funded through the CARES Act through the end of December, and that's when the CARES Act expires, the CARES Act funding expires. And then there's a warrant article before you at the upcoming October town meeting for the second half of that, with that salary. And then following on that, in fiscal 23, we'll be recommending a community development assistant position. That position, there were multiple responsibilities within the staffing study that this person could do, but probably primarily and most importantly is that we've heard the request for the sustainability coordinator, and so this position would initially take on sustainability and climate action plan implementation. And those are all of our slides about staffing.
Okay, any questions from members of the select board?
AFC?
School committee. Okay.
So we wanted to talk about COVID-19 budget restoration. As I mentioned earlier, after March of 2020, we spent a lot of time, both the town and the school and all the department heads, going through budgets and trying to find ways that we, or areas that we could, where we could cut, where we could defer expenses, because we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know what our revenues would look like. We didn't know what the impacts of COVID would be. We could argue that we still don't fully know all of that. So I came to you at the 2020 town meeting, which was pushed to June, and let you know that if we, because of our state aid and our local receipt shortfall, that we estimated an $864 increase to the average single family. But because of all the work of all your department heads on both the town and school side, we were able to reduce our budget by almost $2.5 million for FY21. So I showed you this slide at the time, which showed that in March of 2020, we were estimating a total budget increase of 4.31%, and the budget that was before the voters was 2.97%. Our total budget reductions, and then also our deferrals, which included capital, raise and appropriate articles, and borrowing, we were able to defer or reduce by almost $6.6 million. Some of the things that we did during COVID to do the budget reductions was we did hiring freezes on both sides of the street. We reduced training and travel, professional development, staffing positions if we could. There were overtime reductions. We reduced our OPEB funding to 0. We removed stipends, and then we found some alternative funding sources. We deferred facilities projects and equipment, and also technology needs. In fall 2021, or the fall town meeting for fiscal 21, we started adding back some of those positions. And so you'll remember that we brought back the economic development coordinator position for 6 months. We added a DPW laborer for 7 months, and then we were able to bring on one of the 3 officers that we had planned to bring on in fiscal 21. The restoration that came to you in the FY22 budget was the full cost of all of those positions, so the coordinator, laborer, and the new officer. We had also used grant funding to subsidize some of our outreach worker positions. That was always intended to be a one-time cost, so that came fully back into the budget. We brought back stipends and some professional development and some miscellaneous expenses. We've talked about the COVID-19 budget cuts as being a multi-year restoration, and so I think we've showed you that we're doing that. But these are some of the things that have not been restored to the budget, and so things that we should be thinking about as we look at FY23. Hazardous waste day was cut, that has not come back. Professional development in many departments has been cut and sometimes taken down to 0. OPEB funding was taken down to 0. We do have an article on the upcoming town meeting warrant to fund that at $600,000 using free cash. Our IT overtime was still down to 0. Some personnel positions, the deferred police staffing, some seasonal DPW employees, professional services in different departments, and then also miscellaneous expenses. And so these are things that we expect to see, certainly understanding that that it might not all come back this fiscal year, but these are things that we'll certainly have on our radar as people are forming their budgets. Questions?
Any questions from the select board?
Andrew?
Over the course of the last year, we've had an interesting opportunity to have an experiment where a lot of funds are cut and we wait and see what happens, where there were drawbacks or impacts to the town potentially. And I don't mean to focus specifically on one, but as a for instance, eliminating overtime for information IT probably had some impacts, but were those impacts really worth what we lost in terms of the savings that we got for eliminating it? And again, I'm not going to focus on that one in particular, but I am going to ask the question, are we making an effort to see if the savings that we recognized from some of these cutbacks changes might have been worth losing them? or bringing them back in a different way? Or are we just bringing it back to old funding levels because we bring things back to old funding levels?
I don't think any of these things are being brought back just because they were previously in the budget. I mean, we certainly are looking at, we certainly have the need that's there, but we wouldn't bring it back just to the level that it was pre-COVID. I mean, professional development is a great example of that. Professional development has changed for many of us in terms of the opportunity to participate virtually. If there's any in-person professional development, we don't know how that's going to play out going forward. We don't know what that will look like in terms of conferences, training, and travel. Obviously, as we go into the fall, we're not sure what that's going to look like. We've tried to be really understand the need, but I would say there is absolutely a need. Hazardous Waste Day, I think our public health director is here, she can attest. So in the short time she's been here, she's heard several people who are really looking for Hazardous Waste Day to be put back in the budget. OPEB funding is something that was been on our radar for years. We actually talked about cutting it even before COVID, and that was something that was very concerning to this entire room, and something that we definitely want to bring back. Maybe we'll find some savings in miscellaneous expenses, but you're talking a couple $100s.
That's it, Andrew?
That's all I'm going to ask. Thank you.
Any other AFC?
Beth Blumberg, AFC. I was just going to say that, like, for an example, Hazardous Waste Day was something that we as a community put back on our residents for this year, but the residents as individuals don't have the ability to properly dispose of their hazardous waste without our hosting a Hazardous Waste Day. So that's not something that, although we can remove it for a year, we can remove it indefinitely. And not unless we want to pollute. And I think there's a lot of people in the room that would have a hard time with that.
I believe that there's opportunity privately to dispose of your hazardous waste, but certainly it's something that the community had previously and is looking to have put back.
Anyone else?
Any questions from the school committee? Lisa?
Good.
No.
Thank you very much.
All right. Our next presentation is about insurance and OPEB, or other post-employment benefits. Over the years, we negotiate with all of our unions, both on the town and school side, with our insurance advisory committee to look at different opportunities for our health insurance and how we can lower costs for both the town and the employees. And most recently in 2021, we negotiated an MOA with them where we created criteria for future enrollment in our PPO, or preferred provider plan. That's our more expensive plan and something that some people need for different reasons, and so those were the criteria that we set up. But if an individual does not need the PPO plan, they can enroll in the lower cost HMO plan. And so that's something that we did in 2021, and grandfathering all the employees who were already on the plan, but something that we expect to save money in the future. In looking ahead to our OPEB trust fund, you'll see that we did have growth through 2021. And so we're just over $9 million in our OPEB trust, which sounds great until you look at the number at the bottom. So our OPEB liability, our most recent OPEB liability is that $113 million. As I mentioned, this is something that we talked about even before COVID, because we had talked about potentially lowering that number in the budget. And so one of the things that we heard then, and we've heard since then, because we did cut it down to zero, is what's our funding strategy, and how are we going to get back to that 1.1 million, and even beyond that? What are we, what's the plan? And so the AFC's heard this plan, and so we have this OPEB funding strategy. It would be an amendment to our comprehensive fiscal policies, and it has 5 parts to it. So I'll go through those. The first piece of it is that we would annually transfer all unexpended funds in the insurance budget to the OPEB trust fund. So we budget for people coming on and off, new employees, and so, you know, usually we see that there's some money left over in the insurance budget, and so the strategy would be to, rather than that money going out to free cash, we would transfer that money into the OPEB trust fund. That's the insurance budget is where that OPEB line item is. We did that at the end of fiscal 21. We put $40,000 into the OPEB trust fund, and so that was just the beginning of this strategy. Starting in fiscal 22, so this year, we would fund the OPEB trust fund at a minimum of that 1.1 million. Just to remind people where that number came from, in 2014, we negotiated some plan design changes with the unions. We all came together and had a really good agreement, and the savings in that year was 1.1 million. And so in that year, we transferred the $1.1 million savings into the OPEB trust fund. And so the strategy would be to use multiple funding sources for the OPEB trust, which would be raise and appropriate as our typical method of funding. We see this as an operating expense, and so usually you'll see it as part of the budget as an R&A. But because 1.1 million would be a lot to put on the tax rate at one time, this strategy would use free cash, and then we've also put in an ARPA proposal, and so that's why that's not filled in, because it's, you know, could be fluid depending on the ARPA proposal. And then beginning in FY22, we would charge the individual enterprise funds a percentage of the annual OPEB contribution. So employees whose salaries are charged to water, sewer, or the country club, we would charge back those funds. Right now, that's all been done within the regular budget. Beginning in FY23, increase annual funding appropriation by $5,000 for each benefited position added to the town or school payroll during the prior fiscal year. So for the town, that would mean that our insurance budget would go up $10,000 because we are adding that $15,000 because we've added a golf club manager. We've added the grants and procurement officer, and then we're looking to add that lieutenant. So that would be the $15,000 that we would be increasing that contribution by. And then finally, the one that we've been talking about since I think people started asking the question, which was the Worcester Regional Retirement, the unfunded pension liability. So that's intended to be fully funded by 2035. And then we would reallocate that money to the OPEB trust. So this is the first time that some of you are hearing about this. Certainly no decisions have been made. I expect that there'll be multiple conversations, and you know, ultimately, as I said, it's an amendment to the comprehensive fiscal management policy. Our typical process is that the finance committee would make a recommendation to the select board, and then they would vote. So that's where we're at with that. But I'm happy to answer any questions about any of the slides.
Any questions from members of the select board? Okay, thank you.
I have one quick question.
Sean.
Back to the health insurance for town and school.
Can you speak into the mic a little bit more?
Not close enough. For town and school employees, and this is probably something that needs to be negotiated, but individuals who are eligible to get vaccinated and have voluntarily chosen not to are an increased risk for the health costs of this town. And I don't know if there is some way that we could try and incentivize them to get vaccinated. And I don't know if that's something we've considered. So just putting it out there. Thank you.
Helpful.
Okay, any other questions from the select board? Shelby.
It would be helpful at some point to understand what, I guess, impacts we're going to see in insurance cost premiums. And oh, I was like, oh, there's a chart I missed. So at some point, I mean, understanding kind of what we're anticipating, right? I feel like we've made great decisions, as you've illustrated here, over the past several years, and in some cases maybe got lucky, I don't know, plus our strategy, right? A little bit of both. So understanding what those impacts are, because at least in the private sector, it's not pretty right now, so.
Yeah.
And I'm not expecting you to have an answer,
Right.
but it would be helpful.
So good question. So we're experience rated. And so we typically want to get as much experience behind us before we finalize our insurance rates. And so I think we typically start getting numbers in January. We try to get them in December so that we can put a good number in the budget, but we let it kind of go so we can get more experience. I will say that last year and the year before, we got a 0% increase. And so I don't know what that will mean for this year. We just got our new rates for our retirees because their plan changes on a calendar year and there was a decrease there. So I don't want to set expectations. I'm not really sure what that's going to mean for us, but that's been the last couple of years. And so that's where we're at.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else from members of the select board? No.
AFC? Walter.
On the OPEB, you have, you're on the right slide. The years, the ones with the years,
yep.
yeah. So fiscal 22, the theory is 1.1, but right now we're throwing in 600 in theory if it passes. Is there thought still to get $500,000 from somewhere else, or are we
Yes.
backing up?
Yeah, so our ARPA proposal would cover that additional 500,000. That's where we're at, right? That's where we would be at right now. And then in FY23, we would propose to start putting the cost into the budget incrementally, but you would see something in that line item.
Christie?
Any questions from the school committee? Oh, you have?
Yeah, sorry.
I cut you off.
That's not it, it's fine. Christie, can you go back to the next, could you go to the next OPEB slide? The regional retirement plan, what's our contribution?
5 million?
I'm sorry?
5 million?
5 million. Over what period, please?
Annually.
Yeah. every year.
Annually? So you're proposing that would go back to OPEB funding?
Yeah, after the pension liability is fully funded.
And that will be full?
Own assessment.
Do you want to say that into the?
Sorry. That wouldn't go to zero. When you're paying your assessment, there's a portion that's for the unfunded liability and there's a portion for the current assessment. So it would only be the unfunded liability that would go away. So I can't tell you what it would be in 35, 36, but
less than 5 million.
But less than,
yeah.
Well, I don't know that actually, but because, well, it's going to ratchet up. So, I mean, if you do the math and you say 5 million times a number of years, it gets to be a really big number. So, and so there would be a portion of that would, after that's fully funded, that our assessment would drop. So let's just, for the yucks of it, say it's 5 million and $1 million of it is going towards unfunded liability and 4 is going against regular contribution. When you hit that time when you're all of a sudden fully funded, then your assessment would drop to 4 million. And what we're advocating, and just putting it in writing, just so that Standard & Poor's and our rating agencies know that it's a policy, even though it's a policy that's 12 years away, it's a policy that everyone's agreed on, that when we hit that 2036, that we would take that difference and put it towards our OPEB.
Thank you.
Questions from the school committee? Nothing? Okay.
And then we just wanted to talk about other goals and strategic plan priorities. So this first one just really, there's no cost attached to it, but it speaks to the budget. And so the top priority for the strategic plan was to develop a collaborative plan that would ensure a stronger budgetary alignment between municipal and school department budgets. The dashboard communities is something that we've been doing for a few years, and so is a good measure. The budget process with the summit and then the budget hearing day that we hold is another effort towards that goal. Our finance team meets regularly, so that's finance folks on the town side and the school side, and then also the chairs of the AFC, select board, and school committee. Our capital plan, as we described earlier, is moving forward, and then our COVID-19 response and grants. We worked very closely, the town and the school, on our COVID-19 response, as you saw in my earlier slides. Strategic plan initiative top priority was to accelerate the development of the multi-use trail system and engage the broader community in implementation discussions. This is coming, and I would expect to see some costs associated with this project in FY23. The Active Transportation and Safety Committee will present the final multi-use trail feasibility study to the select board this fall. And so, though there are several grant opportunities, I think that we should expect to see initial costs presented either in a warrant article or in a budget in FY23. Conduct a needs assessment for Westborough senior population to identify opportunities to support our senior residents. This is something that we talked about at the last budget summit. Given that this process is very collaborative, and we really need to be able to be in front of people to have these conversations. COVID obviously put a delay on this project, but I expect to see a warrant article at the annual town meeting requesting funding for this study. When we looked at it a couple years ago, we were estimating about $35,000, but obviously we would need updated estimates. Design and build an intergenerational community center with activities for all ages. The community center is something that we've also been talking about for several years, and so this building would be included in the new long-range capital planning document, which will be used to determine timelines for the anticipated projects over the next 20 years. I think completion of the senior needs assessment will also inform what this will look like. We're hearing from the community, or we're all hearing from the community that people are interested in getting this project going again. Promote education and professional development needs of the workforce and support department heads as they address unmet professional development needs. I put this in here because of the earlier slide. We cut a lot of professional development out of the budget for COVID. And so not only is it important to us and important to our employees, but it was also important to the community as one of the strategic plan initiatives. And then strategically acquire parcels identified in our open space master plan and explore the Community Preservation Act as a mechanism for financing acquisition. The Community Preservation Act Exploratory Committee is continuing their work and will make a presentation to the select board later this year. Over the last couple of years, as you all know, we've acquired a couple of significant parcels in town. And so I think voters should expect, which has really depleted our open space fund. And so I think we should expect to see a request to begin rebuilding that fund either through a capital request or a warrant article or the Community Preservation Act. And then I just want to go back. Sorry about this. So the strategic plan initiative top priority was evaluate and implement recommendations in the public safety needs assessment, which we talked about, but also examine the potential for a satellite public safety facility. And so that's something that, I think we'll see in our long range capital plan, and something that that you'll see, as we put together our plan, that there's an effort for the fire department substation. And then finally, some select board and town manager goals. One of them is to update the strategic plan. The strategic plan was done in 2018. It's a 3 to 5 year document, so we'll be looking to update it. It's particularly good timing because we've just completed the master plan. We have the climate action plan. And so all of those will be sort of worked in together into the new strategic plan. And so we would put an article in the annual town meeting for that purpose. We're also doing a technology assessment, and we've applied to the Commonwealth for a community compact grant. And so they'll do a full assessment of the town's technology needs. And so based on, the outcome of that, we would expect to put some initial costs in the budget or in an article at town meeting. Any questions?
Any questions from the select board? No, thank you.
FC? Andrew?
You mentioned earlier that there was an impact to the Pulte and the funding we were expecting to get to that. Do we have a map somewhere of what we think the new plan is for when we're getting the money relative, or getting money flowing in relative to their development plans for their 14 buildings up there, I think?
I don't have those numbers. I don't know, Fred, if you can speak to the Pulte project and where they're at. The Pulte project and sort of where they're at in getting their certificates of occupancy. I don't know how far behind they are in their construction schedule.
Say it one more time. Which project? Pulte. Pulte. Oh, yeah. Pulte's project. Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies. Community Development Director, Building Commissioner Fred Lenardo. Pulte is, well, completed 2 buildings, if you will, so they've received certificate of occupancies in those 2 buildings. They've well on their way to the 3rd building. They put in the foundation and started elevators and things on the 4th building. There's a 5th foundation going in, coming up shortly.
So I guess at one point we actually saw a long-range plan as to how this was going to play out. And it was a best guess, and I don't take that away. But I hear you saying up through a 5th foundation. Right. I think they're talking about 14 buildings up there. Mm-hmm. Do we have a sense of what that development is relative to the income we're looking to get from it at all?
Yeah, I don't have a projection of when they'll complete those buildings. We haven't.
Well, their anticipated build schedule has been 2 per year, so it was 7 years total. And I'd say they lost time during COVID, obviously. Yep. But I actually think there may be, if you took COVID out of that, I'd say they were ahead of schedule. Their sales were stagnant somewhat during COVID. Well, I shouldn't say obviously, but they were. But my understanding now is their sales have picked up quite a bit. So their build is predicated on their sales.
Okay.
If that makes sense. But I would say they're fairly well on schedule for that 2 per year. Again, if you kind of factor out COVID.
Thank you.
Yeah, a major factor.
Walter.
Yeah, my question is on the intergenerational community center. Isn't the library an intergenerational community center? Or I mean, we're about to invest potentially in a expansion there, so I don't get the difference between the two.
So we're actually going to get a presentation from the library on their project, but I would say that when these discussions were happening about the community center, there was discussion about the rec department really being able to have activities, so basketball courts, classrooms, potentially a pool, maybe a building that would house both recreation and potentially the senior center were part of the discussion.
All set, Andrew?
I also had a question about the old AMC movie theater and whether that is still a liability to us, or is there a path to moving that to a potential asset for this town that we could turn around? Uh-oh, third rail here. No. Sorry, no?
That's favorite question.
So the town doesn't own the building. We still have not identified any owners, so we're moving through the typical process that we in land court.
At one point, we actually had a motion to be able to take it over, and that hit a roadblock. Could that be submitted again, or is that path forward removed as an option?
The select board was granted authorization to take it by eminent domain, but chose not to do that based on additional information.
Okay, thank you.
Christy, just to elaborate on, if I may.
Sure.
Okay, sorry. Are we anticipating any sort of maintenance safety costs as it relates to that building as we approach winter? To just elaborate on Andrew's costs.
No, the Chief Purcell worked with a company, to board up that building last year. We actually went to town meeting, I think, with an article to get some additional funding for that, so we're not anticipating anything else.
All set in?
All set, thank you.
Anybody else from AFC? Thank you.
Any questions from the school committee? Okay.
Jim Robbins, our town planner, is going to talk about our master plan.
Thank you for having me. I'm Jim Robbins, town planner. As you probably know, unless you're not paying attention to the planning board, we recently adopted a new town master plan after a 2-year effort. On Tuesday evening this week, the planning board and the board of selectmen had a joint meeting at which they discussed any final issues with the draft that took 2 years to complete, and the board, the planning board took it under advisement from the selectmen to adopt the plan, and they did that. They actually adopted the plan Tuesday night, so you have a brand new master plan. Since 2004, we were able to accomplish about 64 of the 100 goals in that plan, and we hope we can do as well with this plan. Many of the members of the community that are in this room this evening and staff participated on the Master Plan Advisory Committee, which was responsible for brainstorming goals and objectives for the plan and putting together action statements or implementation statements for the plan. And what I want to show you this evening is just a very few of those recommended plans. There are 9 strategic chapters in the plan, 7 of which are traditional, the first 7 that you'll see. The last 2 are unique to Westborough. I've never known a community that put together chapters on sustainability and climate change, as well as public health. Our consultant, VHB, said that we're the only community that's ever done that. Obviously, COVID piqued our interest with public health, so that we saw that that was an important thing to add. So the key elements of the master plan and expected implementation projects. The first is land use. To encourage the balance of land uses to promote vitality, environmental sustainability, economic stability, as well as to prevent an overburden or overextension of municipal services and infrastructure. One of the first actions proposed was to update the town's comprehensive wastewater management plan, the CWMP, and the plan prioritized that as high priority with an expectancy for completion of 1 to 2 years, and it's currently underway. You'll notice that I put dollar signs after each one of these objectives. I don't have a dollar amount for you yet. That would be something that we would have to look at as the priorities move forward. So I've chosen to use a single dollar sign as low cost, which would be in-house, to moderate, which is $2 signs where you hire a consultant or you need some capital costs, to $3 signs, which would be quite expensive and obviously require town meeting action for expenditures. The second action would be to clarify and modify as necessary the existing downtown planning overlay to incorporate concepts as modified downtown planning overlay district to solidify the community's vision for the downtown area and to work to eliminate inconsistent development patterns. The downtown is beautiful. It's a historic district, but it does have a lot of old buildings that really need to be addressed through some kind of incentives. We call that a moderate priority with a timeline of 1 to 5 years and probably of internal cost. Housing. Continue to diversify the town's housing stock. For example, the type and price point to meet the current and future needs of residents, notably young professionals, young families, and seniors. To provide for the creation, first action would be to provide for the creation and preservation of affordable housing for the benefit of low and moderate income households through the Westborough Affordable Housing Trust. The priority is high, 1 to 5 year horizon with some cost to the town, moderate cost to the town. And the dollar assessment comes from our consultant who's looked at similar types of initiatives across the state. Second action would be to prepare and regularly update a housing production plan to proactively plan and guide housing production. The priority would be moderate with a 1 to 5 year with a comprehensive update every 5 years at an internal cost to the town. Next, economic development. Improve Westborough's major shopping centers and commercial corridors, including Bay State Commons, such that they have a greater mix of uses, are better integrated with the surrounding neighborhoods, have greater accessibility and walkability, and meet the modern needs of the community. One of the first actions would be to examine the traffic patterns around the downtown and Bay State to maximize vehicular access and walkability. High priority. The public during our public hearing said that the downtown was the most important thing and the number one thing on their mind to create the quality of life that we want to have in Westborough in the future. High priority, 5 to 10 years, significant cost. And the significant cost would be both funds locally from the community, as well as applying for grant funds to do such things as study the Rotary for reconfiguration, and in hopes of creating businesses that could bring their businesses to the sidewalk, create a more walkable environment. Secondly, to promote a mix of uses in and around Bay State Commons and other shopping centers through land use, zoning, and development initiatives. High priority, 5 to 10 years, internal cost to the town. What I mean by that is staff when I say internal cost. Next, natural, historic, and cultural resources. Coordinate the management and further protection of Westborough's unique and important natural resources, including its water supply. Action 1, to improve and expand the town's land management planning for its conservation areas. High priority, 1 to 5 years expected timeline with a low to moderate cost to the town. Secondly, to investigate opportunities to protect Westborough's active agricultural sites for the long term. That's a high priority, 1 to 5 years with a low to moderate cost to the town. Open space. Broaden the protection and responsible use of Westborough's vast open space and agricultural space, which contribute to the protection of natural resources, including climate, provide and enhance the community's aesthetic, scenic character, and offer passive recreational opportunities. First action, to identify additional opportunities to fund the town's open space fund, including through the passage and implementation of the Community Preservation Act. A high priority, 1 to 5 years with a low cost to the town. Secondly, to continue to expand the town's network of recreational commuter trails, including the completion of the Charm Bracelet and the Boston-Worcester Airline Trail, to promote connectivities and support public health and wellness. Expand sidewalks to connect neighborhoods and improve walkability in town. Bike lanes should be added to the existing or new roadways to offer easier bike travel. High priority, timeline 5 to 15 years. Project cost, low to expensive. The town would absorb survey and planning and design, construction through grant funds. This project is a long-term project, quite expensive. Transportation circulation. Enhance the transportation infrastructure with and proximate to the downtown of Westborough to improve the area's overall operation, efficiency, and safety for all users. First action, improve wayfinding. For example, the visual directional cues in the downtown to help people better understand and navigate its environment, as well as to better understand services that are available. Moderate priority, 1 to 5 years, moderate cost to the town. Second action, prepare corridor plans for Route 135 and Route 30 to identify options for improvements and coordinate future investment. We recently completed a corridor study of the Otis Street industrial area. It's quite beneficial for the town to understand what its needs are going to be in years ahead and how to improve opportunities in our commercial districts. High priority, 1 to 5 years, low to moderate cost to the town. Public facilities and services. Ensure the long-term sustainability of Westborough's water, sewer, and stormwater infrastructure. Action number 1, update the town's comprehensive wastewater management plan to further its commitment to managing its wastewater infrastructure and other resources for the long term. High priority, 1 to 5 years. This project is already underway with a low cost to the town. I mentioned this earlier, so it's a popular topic. It came up several times in the master plan. Second action, during major infrastructure projects, also evaluate if there are other improvements that can be made at the same time. For example, improve sidewalks, road access, pedestrian safety. High priority, 1 to 5 years, low cost to the town. This is one of our new goals, one of our new chapters, sustainability and climate change. Mitigate greenhouse gas emissions at the community scale and across all the town's municipal operations consistent with state goals. First action, to adopt the Climate Change Action Plan developed by the Climate Action Task Force and create town staff roles and committee assignments that would be responsible to ensure the advancement of the plan's strategies. High priority, 1 to 5 years already underway, moderate cost to the town. That should be number 2, not number 1 here. It says number 1, but number 2, consider incorporating sustainable design standards into the town's bylaws. For example, requiring or encouraging the installation of solar voltaic systems or electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Require large developments to meet certain green building standards, such as the rating system under the U.S. Green Building Council's Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, LEED. The program, LEED program, or adopting a net zero stretch energy code. High priority, 1 to 5 years, low cost to the town. Lastly, public health. Make the community healthy, physically and mentally. A planning priority. In doing so, be proactive in addressing current and emerging health challenges and their underlying social determinants. First action, evaluate the need and feasibility of adding a public health nurse educator. Under the direction of the Board of Health, this position could offer public health services, be a resource on various health topics, and support the planning and implementation of community health programming. A high priority, 1 to 5 years, moderate cost to the town. Secondly, perform a review of the town's zoning and general bylaws to ensure that they contain adequate protections for health and for public health and sufficiently promote community well-being. For example, limiting sensitive land uses within or proximate to areas generating high levels of noise or air pollution. Moderate priority, 1 to 5 years, low cost to the town. Thank you. Questions?
Any questions from the select board? Has everyone read the master plan? Excellent.
All 300.
Pages and appendices.
AFC, excuse me. Jim, don't go away. AFC.
Up for me. I think the curtain's coming down.
Just clapping at the impressive work. It's an amazing work.
Jim, this has been quite an effort, and congratulations on managing it through the committee. When are we going to see a number hung on this thing?
A number for each of the projects?
Cost estimate?
Sure. So the planning board will develop a priorities and an implementation plan. They're going to begin discussing that next. They'll pick goals that they want to achieve in the implementation plan, and then they'll present some numbers to the town. A lot of these, if you noticed, were things that would be done in-house. Plans, programs, for example, sustainability, different department heads would become involved in implementing goals of the plans. Those would be absorbed by staff hours, but capital projects would definitely have an item that would come to town meeting for a budget.
Yeah, I just find it a little disconcerting that we could go through all of this and our consultants have a good idea of what similar plans cost, and yet we don't have a ballpark range of what this might cost the town over the next 5 to 15 years?
So, for example, if the planning board decided to go with, say, one of the healthcare recommendations and wanted to have a nurse, they would present that to the town. But with the timeline being such that it's between 5 and 15 years, if we provided an estimate for 10 years out, say now, the numbers will definitely change.
Well, of course, and you know, we're not a major oil company that's looking 50 years over the horizon, but personally, I do have some expectation that if we are going to accept this plan, we who are long-term residents and those who are planning to be long-term residents have an idea of what this is going to cost, understanding that numbers change as the environment changes, as whatever you're dealing with changes. But we should at least have, you know, I'll pull 2 numbers out, 100 million, 150 million.
Point taken.
Okay, so I think that at some point it would be helpful to the AFC if we could see those numbers. Thank you.
I'll step in and just give a counterpoint that the purpose of the master plan isn't to provide those numbers. It's to provide strategy and guidelines and goals. And as those goals and actions get prioritized, there will be multiple decisions on how, if and how and when they get implemented. And that's really where the scope of the work comes. And at any point in time, you can look and say, you know, this is an initiative and it's a goal of the master plan. There's an action item for it, but the implementation doesn't pass the cost benefit, you know, decision process. And that'll go through the committee processes, it'll go through town meeting, and it's there. And so you can say, you know, I want a low number and a high number now. I'm not even sure how, you know, other than knowing that things are generally, you know, could be absorbed internally. $1 sign would require some outside assistance, $2 signs, or expected to be more need than that, which is $3 signs. At this point, I think it's premature to expect those.
Well,
estimates.
I appreciate them, and what you said is correct in terms of it's a strategic plan, it's a goal, it's what we look at is for guidance. But on the other hand, people who listen to this, citizens of Westborough, right? They're looking at this and all they're seeing is dollar signs, dollar signs, dollar signs. I think they have a right to know the approximate, even if it's subject to change as we go forward, at least that we're thinking about a real number and not looking online for hotel rooms or airlines. So I don't want to be argumentative, gentlemen. I really don't, because you guys did a fantastic job in pulling all this together. I just think from a taxpayer point of view, that's something, you know, when we gave our message at the last town annual meeting, I think we were pretty clear that we would like to see cost to taxpayer estimates up front, not halfway through or at the end of an implementation, and oh, surprise, here's the number. You know, so I really would like to see some effort made at putting some financial context around the master plan.
I welcome you to come to my office and we can talk about that more.
Okay, I'm happy to do so. And I'm welcoming you. In fact, I think you'll be at our committee meeting on the 4th of October. So perhaps it would be a good time to get into this a little more. Otherwise, we'll set up a special meeting for you guys to meet
with the understanding, as most people that work on the plan understand, that it's a guidance document. It's not a capital plan.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
Anything from the school committee? Yep.
I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Following on that, we're going to hear from Pete Dunbeck related to the climate action plan. I'm just not sure how this works because he is remote with us.
Can you hear me?
Yes, so.
That's how it works.
Voice from above.
It's like Santa.
When you're ready. So thank you for the opportunity to address you this evening. As you all know, we have completed the climate action plan and delivered it on schedule, and I think did a credible job of a major task during COVID. We are now, as the previous discussion was about the master plan, moving from strategy to implementation, and the details of the implementation are still under development and will constantly be under development. We formed a new Sustainable Westborough Committee and some new governance models around that. The slide you see shows the major goals and activities from the Climate Action Plan, and I'll be using this as a guide for the budget discussions without as much detail as Jim just had. If you could click one click. I wanted to highlight in the work, I'm going to go through all of the items, but I really want to highlight areas where I think there's a financial discussion and a budget-related discussion I want to have. So building emissions is one of the key areas of greenhouse gas generation. One of the foundational tasks is to drive building energy efficiency. And the first item is really referring to community-wide. The municipal energy reduction is the third item. That's also energy efficiency. For the municipal energy efficiency, energy reduction, we have been using the Green Community Program and the Green Community Grant Funds as a primary vehicle for making those changes. With the Green Community, we brought in about $300,000 worth of grant funds for various weatherization and lighting and energy reduction activities. The community-wide building energy efficiency, the first item is really leveraging the state and utility programs like Mass Save and doing kind of the legwork of promoting them locally and driving awareness programs. And we have undertaken this year an initiative on, it's called the Municipal Partnership. Kim Foster is a key co-chair of that effort, as well as one of the Sustainable Westborough members, Tim. And it also came with some grant money, and so we have some small amount, $9,000 coming into the town from that effort. Heating electrification is really stopping to burn fossil fuels in our buildings. And again, this is more residential and commercial industrial focus. One of the key initiatives to achieve that is the last bullet there, green zoning and building codes. We believe that there is opportunity to change the way we're building buildings and to do it in a way that is more energy efficient, can be economically done, and also reduce carbon emissions at the same time. The reason that one has an asterisk is we've been advised that it's best practice is to engage with the consultant like mass planners in this, and so there's a small amount of cost associated with evaluating zoning strategies and moving forward in that space. In the transportation electrification, electrification is about promoting electric vehicles. Key part of that is to build charging station infrastructure. Our approach for that is to build both a plan and a set of policies, policies for the community and policies for the town government. There is significant grant funding for EVs, in particular, as vehicle purchase, as well as for the EV charging stations. We have the Green Community Funds can be used for this also. And as we develop our kind of more detailed EV charging plan, we probably will be using Green Community Funds as much as possible. But these are highly, highly subsidized by state mandate, by the utilities and other rebates, so that 80 to 90% of the costs are paid for by others, and the town burden is light, even without the Green Community Funds. Town fleet electrification, I think we've done a very good job of getting started, particularly with the police department and their hybrids, and now a proposal for an EV. I think our need there is to develop a municipal plan for fleet electrification and look at the emerging technologies which is coming out in larger vehicles, pickup trucks, and even larger than that. Some of that technology isn't readily available or isn't cost effective today. So I think that's part of having a policy and having a plan for fleet electrification. I think we're doing a good job there. There will be cost, and it's, I think, cost justified when you look at the capital expense versus the operating expense. It pays back, and I think it will continue to get more economical as the production levels go up. Clean sources of electricity. One element of that is the municipal use of electricity. In the fall of last year, the Community Choice Aggregation, which is now called Westborough Power Choice, increased the amount of renewable content that residents and businesses use in their electricity. And this first item is about having the municipal use ratcheted to the same level to continue to show our town commitment to renewable energy. There is cost associated with the increased renewables. As when we did the analysis on Westborough Power Choice, it was a small percent, 3 to 5% of the electric bill in order to get a significant change in the renewable content. So it's something we're going to have to put together and justify. Another major initiative is in regard to solar development within the community. This involves both on municipal land as well as encouragement and education in regard to the state program that's called SMART in the development of community-based solar. We are pending tomorrow. We're expecting to submit a grant request for a meta grant, which will get us started in this area. My expectation is that for the municipal property solar, it's going to become a revenue producer because the developers will pay real estate lease fees to get access to the land to build their solar farms. So even if we don't buy any electricity and don't take on any risks associated with the capital equipment, we can get money based on the lease payments for the use of the land. So I think there's opportunity in this municipal and community solar to be a net positive revenue to the community. This is just starting, so there's no promises. We're just beginning investigation on many of these things. A key element of the climate action plan is community engagement, and we plan to have events for residents and the business community to make them aware of the state programs. We've developed we're in development on a new website, some other collateral, so forth. These are low dollar items. There is some budget, but fortunately we have money coming from the municipal partnership that was mentioned earlier and other sources that I believe this is really a pretty low dollar item, but I did flag it. One position I wanted to highlight is, as I described in this, there's many opportunities for grant funds. There's many moving parts on this program in regard to setting priorities, setting policy, working across the municipal staff. And so the Climate Action Plan had recommended a town staff position. In our document, we called it a sustainability coordinator. I believe that this is being considered in potentially as a part-time within the community development organization, and potentially not using the name sustainability coordinator, but to provide some of this glue that we need to make sure that these programs run efficiently. The work of the Climate Action Plan is time sensitive, time is of the essence, and the programs are changing all the time at the state, and I think the towns that have the attention and nimbleness to respond to new state programs are doing the best in regard to capturing grant money and taking advantage of state programs. So I think it's highly advantageous to have some focused staff time such as was recommended in the CAP. That's what I have prepared. I'd be happy to take questions.
Any questions from the select board? None? Okay, thank you.
AFC? Thank you.
School committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pete. I'm just going to go over a couple more slides, but I just wanted to reiterate what Chris said earlier, and really that the purpose of tonight and what was on our goals is the purpose of tonight is to sort of jumpstart us into the FY23 budget planning process. And you received a ton of information tonight, but the point is that there's a lot of costs associated with all the good things that we already offer for services and all the infrastructure that we have, and there's a lot of great ideas out there, but there's costs associated, and so just trying to put that all out on the table before we dive into FY23. When we talk about FY23 budget, the format and process will be similar to years past, so that hopefully we'll be earning another one of these Distinguished Budget Presentation Awards. We're continuing to follow the Government Finance Officers Association best practices and format. And so we've submitted our FY22 budget also. So Leah's wall is going to get filled up, we're hoping. But so that will include all the narratives and all the goals that all the department heads worked so hard on and put out there for the community. And we've received really positive feedback with that document. It's really helpful and easy to read. And then we have just the budget process. So tonight we have this meeting. The capital budget requests were due already. In early October is when we'll request the budgets and we'll schedule our budget meetings. Capital planning meetings, I think, are going to happen a little earlier this year. We're hoping to get that process well underway. In early November, we do department meetings with all of our department heads, myself and Leah. And then our budget is due to all of you on December 21st, and so that will be available. And then in January is when we do our budget hearing, which is at the select board meeting. We typically do it at a regular select board meeting. Last year, we actually did it as part of our all-day budget meeting, so we'll have to work through that format. And then our warrant articles come to us in mid-January, and we hopefully we'll be back in this room for our joint departmental budget meeting with the select board and advisory finance committee. I put January 27th. We'll figure out if that works for everybody. So that's the process. A couple of our presenters today, including myself, talked to you about American Rescue Plan proposals, and so I just wanted to really quickly touch on what our process is for that. The town will receive approximately $5.6 million in ARPA money. It'll be dispersed in 2 rounds, so we've already received some of it. And so our process has been that we, on July 30th, sent out a proposal form to all of the departments and also related committees. When I say related committees, I mean committees who potentially would have eligible uses for that. So Sustainable Westborough, the Affordable Housing Trust, and others, I think, were included in that, as well as all the department heads. And so the proposal forms were due back to us on August 30th. The finance team has looked at them and discussed them. Again, you've heard some of them tonight. These were not your formal ARPA proposals. They just have to work into some of the plans that we have going forward, understanding that if those funds aren't awarded, we'll be back to you with some other budgetary request. The finance team's going to evaluate the proposals next month, and then we'll make a recommendation to the select board and the finance committee, and then proposals can be awarded. So there were 22 ARPA proposals from 11 departments. Total request was approximately $11.8 million. So unfortunately, we have some decisions to make. And our last presentation is the library project update.
Alan.
Do you have a question? Oh, sorry.
Yep. Sorry, Ian?
Yeah, Krista, can you just remind me, others might know it, but the ARPA funds, they don't have to be spent in 1 year, is that accurate?
Right. So I think we have through FY26 to spend them. And so that's one of the discussions points that we had at the finance team meeting was how much money do we want to allocate immediately? And
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Other questions?
AFC, any question?
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Maureen Amiot, Library Director. Thank you for making it to the last item on our agenda. I think the most exciting one on our agenda, which is an update on the library construction renovation project. I have a little bit of a timeline, and I have some exciting updates for you. So if you're not familiar with the project, I won't go into the full history of it. It's all on our website, but it started with a needs assessment in 2012 that determined that the library was undersized for our current and future population and the current uses and future uses of the building. So fast forward to the availability of planning and design grant money from our state agency, the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners. We went through a planning and design process and then submitted a grant application to fund the plan that we had come up with. In summer of 17, we were awarded approximately $9.4 million towards our $24 million project. And at that time, we were waitlisted. There were 29 projects from around the state, and we were kind of in the middle of the pack, which at the time was a little bit disappointing, but in hindsight, it was perfect timing. We moved up to #1 on the waiting list this summer when the project above us, Melrose, was awarded their project. So we always say that we're #1, but now we're really #1. And so what that means is that we expect to be awarded our grant in summer of '22 when the MBLC awards their next round of grants. But we have some plans in the works prior to the grant being awarded. What we had been thinking all along at the Library Building Committee was that once our grant award was on the horizon, we really wanted to go back and do a little bit more design development and do a new cost estimate because the projected costs were based on 2016 numbers. And we've heard all about, and we all know about the escalation of costs just in the last couple years. Our project had 3 years of escalation built into it, but we know that won't be enough. So our plan was to start in January of '22, working on a little bit of design development and a new cost estimate. That will be funded by trust funds that the library trustees have committed to the project, so there's no cost to the taxpayer at all for that process. And the architect we've been working with has told us that that will be a 6 to 8 month process, which lines us up perfectly for our expected award in July. And then once we're notified that our grant is available, we have 6 months to get our local approval. So it kind of lines up perfectly with the fall '22 town meeting. We would have an updated cost estimate, and we would be able to come to town meeting with accurate numbers that reflect the current state of construction. Assuming that it's approved in the fall of '22, it would be about another year of work to finalize designs, do bidding, and it would give us time to look for a temporary location. The entire library will be affected by this project, so it will be a construction site, so it won't be suitable for the public or the staff to be working in a construction site. So we'll be looking for a temporary site somewhere in town. And that's always the question I get from residents when I talk about this project is, where's the temporary space gonna be? And we don't know at this point what will be available and what will be suitable at the time. So we hope to stay somewhere near downtown so that it'll still be convenient to the schools schools and to the downtown area, but we don't know. So we anticipate moving out of the current library at the end of '23 so that construction can begin. Construction would take somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 years. And then there's a little star in the corner that says substantial completion. That will be like early to mid 2025. Party, parade, celebration. But these were the projected costs that we came up with as part of our construction grant in 2017. The estimated total project cost was approximately $24 million. The grant award is $9.4 million. The grant award does not change. If there's escalation, that's the amount that we will receive no matter what. So the estimated total cost to the town will be about $14 million in the end. And the MBLC grants work very similar to the MSBA grants, where the town will be asked to approve the whole $24 million, and then the grant is a reimbursement grant over a period of 5 years. So just to give you a sense, these are just a few exterior photos of the building. You see the front facade. You see from the side, that picture was taken from the parking lot of the Congregational Church. And then the other side with the red roofs is the Parkman Street side. The high-level, quick explanation of the project is that the 1980 addition with the red roofs that you see in the bottom picture will be removed. They'll excavate down about 4 feet and do a new full 3-story addition in the back of the building, retaining the front part of the building and our beautiful historic building. The front facade will remain, and the addition will have roof lines that match. It will no longer have a flat roof like it does now. And this is just one possibility. I don't think it will eventually look exactly like this picture, but this was a conceptual, high-level concept drawing that the architects came up with. And just also, looking down from above, kind of rendering of what the footprint of the building would be. We'll get a little bit closer to the property line in the back. We'll go a little bit wider on each side, marked in red, and we'll have a new rebuilt entrance on the side, on the Parkman Street side. That construction project will add approximately 16,000 square feet, and that should take care of our needs for the long foreseeable future. And they gave us one little exciting rendering of what the interior children's room could be. That will be one big change that we'll be making, is moving the children's room from the basement to the top floor, to take the children out of the basement and put them up top where there's lots of light and color and excitement. But there are a lot of really exciting changes. If you would like more details about it, I'm happy to discuss it with you anytime. I love this project. I could talk about it at length, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. But I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Any questions from the select board? No, thank you.
AFC? Thank you.
Any questions from the school committee?
Exciting. Very exciting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes our presentation. So we'll put this presentation up, and we can also send it out to all of you. And if you have questions, please feel free to reach out.
Okay. Select board, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Seconded. Seeing no discussion, a vote. All in favor? Select board is adjourned.
AFC, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Seconded.
All in favor? Adjourned.
School committee.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Second.
Inadvertently voted with you guys. I think you guys are actually at 6.